"Do you remember me, human? I'm your childhood neighbor," said the alien beauty. The scorching twin suns of Verania beat down relentlessly as Dylan Rhodes guided his weathered starship into the familiar docking bay of Port Emerald. 15 years had passed since he last set foot on this lush world, yet the sweet, slightly metallic scent of the atmosphere flooded him with memories of his youth. As the landing gear engaged with a satisfying thud, Dylan ran a hand through his tousled brown hair and checked his reflection in the cockpit window. At 32, he presented an impressive figure, tall and muscular, with a neatly trimmed beard and the rugged good looks that came from years of adventure across the galaxy. The light tan of his bare torso spoke of recent shore leave on some pleasure world. "Welcome back to Port Emerald," the automated system chirped. "Please proceed to customs for processing." Dylan grabbed his worn leather jacket and slung it over his shoulder as he descended the ship's ramp. The spaceport hadn't changed much. Still a mix of gleaming modern architecture and weathered structures that had seen better days. He had grown up here as one of the few humans on Verania, when his parents were part of the first wave of Earth colonists. As he approached the customs area, a striking figure caught his eye. A woman leaned casually against one of the support pillars, her emerald skin shimmering in the harsh sunlight. She wore what appeared to be a metallic fabric that hugged her curves perfectly, a corset-like top with a plunging neckline paired with form-fitting trousers that left little to the imagination. But it was her eyes that captivated him, vibrant green orbs that seemed to see right through him. Long, straight hair the color of polished jade cascaded over her shoulders as she tilted her head, studying him with obvious interest. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, but Dylan couldn't quite place it. She pushed off from the pillar with fluid grace and approached him, a knowing smile playing across her full lips. "Well, well," she purred, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Look who finally decided to come home." She gestured to herself with an exaggerated flourish. "Don't tell me you've forgotten your next-door neighbor already." Dylan's jaw dropped as recognition finally clicked. "Holy Taylor. Little Tala, the gangly green girl who used to climb trees and play space pirates with me, has transformed into this stunning creature before me." Her musical laughter rang out. "Not so little anymore, am I?" She did a playful spin, giving him the full view. "Though I see you've done some growing up yourself, Dylan Rhodes." He couldn't help but grin. "This is unexpected. Last time I saw you, you were, what, 14? 13, she corrected, stepping closer. "Right before your family moved back to Earth. You promised to write, you know." There was a hint of accusation in her tone, though her eyes still sparkled with humor. "Yeah, about that." Dylan rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "Life got a bit complicated after we left. But hey, I'm here now. Let me make it up to you, maybe over drinks?" Tala's smile widened. "I thought you'd never ask. There's this little place called the Stellar Wind that makes the best Fordan sunrise cocktails," she added with a wink. "Plus, we have 15 years of catching up to do." As they walked together toward the spaceport exit, Dylan couldn't help but notice how heads turned to watch them pass, the tall, muscular human and the striking green-skinned beauty. He had a feeling his return to Verania was about to get very interesting indeed. The Stellar Wind was exactly the kind of establishment Dylan remembered from his youth. A perfect blend of exotic alien architecture and comfortable familiarity. Bioluminescent crystals pulsed softly along the walls, casting everything in an ethereal emerald glow that complemented Tequila's skin perfectly. They found a secluded booth in the corner, and Dylan couldn't help but notice how Tala deliberately chose to sit beside him rather than across the table. The proximity of her body sent pleasant shivers down his spine. "So, Tala," she began, stirring her Virginian sunrise with a crystalline straw. 15 years is a long time to be away. What really happened to you?" Her green eyes held a mixture of curiosity and something deeper. Concern, perhaps even hurt. Dylan took a slow sip of his drink, savoring the exotic blend of alien fruits and spirits. "It's complicated. One day my parents just announced we were leaving. No explanation, no warning. I was 17 and angry. I didn't understand why we had to abandon everything we'd built here. And now?" Tala leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his. The contact sent electricity through his body. "Now I'm starting to think there was more to it than they ever told me." He turned to face her, their faces mere inches apart. The timing was suspicious. Right after that incident at the research facility where my father worked. Tala's expression shifted subtly. The explosion that was ruled an accident? Dylan raised an eyebrow. Because I remember overhearing something that night. My father was arguing with yours about containment and protocols. He watched her reaction carefully. Your father was head of security there, wasn't he? Tara bit her lower lip. A gesture that momentarily distracted Dylan from the serious conversation. There are things about that night. Things I've never told anyone. She placed her hand on his thigh, the touch both intimate and warning. Some secrets are dangerous, Dylan. He covered her hand with his own, feeling the subtle texture differences in her alien skin. I'm not that scared little boy anymore, Tala. And something tells me you're not that innocent girl either. Quote, dot. She laughed softly, the sound sending pleasant vibrations through him. Oh, I was never innocent, darling, but you're right. I've grown up in more ways than one. Her free hand traced patterns on his bare arm, leaving trails of tingling sensation. I've learned to play the game to survive in this world of secrets and lies. Quote, dot. And what game are we playing now? Dylan asked, his voice husky. That depends, she purred, leaning even closer. Are you ready to learn the truth about why your family really left? Because once you know, there's no going back. Before he could respond, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to see an imposing figure. Another Viridian, his green skin darker and mottled with age. Well, well, the newcomer's voice was like gravel. If it isn't little Talatal and a human, how interesting. His eyes narrowed. You wouldn't happen to be Jonathan Rhodes's boy, would you? Dylan felt Talala tense beside him. Commander Vex, she said, her voice carefully neutral. What an unexpected pleasure. Vex's smile didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't aware you were entertaining old friends. The way he said it made Dylan's skin crawl. There was history here, and not the good kind. Just catching up, Tala replied smoothly, but her hand gripped Dylan's thigh tighter. It's been 15 years after all, pinching it. 15 years, Vex mused. Yes, right after that unfortunate accident, your father still speaks of it sometimes, Tala. Dylan felt Tala's sharp intake of breath. Her father had been a strong, proud man in Dylan's memories. What had happened? If you'll excuse us, Tala stood gracefully, pulling Dylan up with her. We were just leaving. Of course, Vex stepped aside, but his predatory gaze followed them. Do give my regards to your mother, Dylan. Oh wait, she passed recently, didn't she? My condolences. Dylan froze. He hadn't told anyone about his mother's death. It had happened just 3 months ago on Earth. How did this man know? Tarajilla's grip on his arm tightened, steering him toward the exit. Once outside, she pulled him into a shadowy alcove, her body pressing against his with urgent intensity. Listen to me, she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. You're being watched. Have been since you landed. That wasn't a coincidence. Vex showing up. They knew you were coming back. Dylan wrapped an arm around her waist, partly to steady her, partly because he couldn't help himself. Who's they? The same people who forced your family to leave. Her hands slid up his chest, and while part of him knew this was cover for their conversation, the effect was still intoxicating. Your father discovered something he shouldn't have, something that could change everything we know about Verdun and human relations. Your father tried to help cover it up, protect your family. Her fingers traced his jaw, eyes locked with his. It broke him, Dylan. The guilt, the secrets. Oh, they destroyed him. Quote, dot. Dylan cupped her face, thumb stroking her cheek. Tell me everything. Not here. She glanced around nervously. My apartment is secure. A sly smile crossed her face. Plus, I still owe you 15 years of catching up. As they made their way through the neon-lit streets, Dylan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something bigger than either of them realized. But with Tala's hand in his, and the promise of answers ahead, he found he didn't care. Tasala's apartment was a stunning blend of Viridian bioarchitecture and modern luxury. Located in one of the towering spires that dotted Port Emerald's skyline, the living space seemed to pulse with life walls embedded with the same bioluminescent crystals from the bar. But here they responded to movement, creating waves of soft light that followed their path. "Make yourself comfortable," Tala said, activating a privacy field that turned the panoramic windows opaque. The city lights beyond became a soft, diffused glow. "I think we both could use something stronger than those sunrise cocktails." Dylan watched her move gracefully to a crystalline cabinet, admiring how the shifting lights played across her green skin. You've done well for yourself," he observed, noting the expensive furnishings and advanced tech. She glanced over her shoulder, treating him to a sultry smile. "Archaeological consulting pays surprisingly well, especially when you're the only one willing to explore certain restricted areas." She returned with 2 glasses of iridescent blue liquid. Speaking of which, their fingers brushed as she handed him the drink, and Dylan felt that familiar spark of electricity between them. "Is this what I think it is? Real Andromeda ice wine? Only the best for my long-lost human," she purred, settling beside him on the plush sofa, her thigh pressed against his. "Though I should warn you, it affects humans differently than Viridians." "Trying to get me drunk and take advantage of me?" "Darling," she laughed, the sound rich and musical. "If I wanted to take advantage, I wouldn't need the wine." Her free hand traced patterns on his forearm, sending shivers down his spine. "But first, there's something you need to see." She placed her glass down and retrieved a small crystalline cube from a hidden compartment. As she held it, the cube activated, projecting a holographic display of what appeared to be ancient cave paintings. "These were discovered at the research facility," Tala explained, her voice turning serious despite their intimate positioning. "Your father found them while overseeing the expansion of the lower levels. Look at the figures carefully." Dylan leaned closer, both to examine the images and to breathe in Talala's intoxicating scent. The paintings showed what were clearly humans interacting with Viridians, but the dating stamp in the corner made his blood run cold. "That's impossible," he whispered. "This is dated over 10,000 years ago. Official first contact was only 3 centuries ago." "Exactly." Tala's fingers entwined with his. "Your father discovered proof that humans and Viridians had not only met before, but had lived together, worked together, loved together." Her last words carried a weight that made Dylan's heart race. "But why cover it up? Why force my family to leave?" Tala shifted, straddling his lap in one fluid motion. The position was intimate, but her expression was deadly serious. "Because it threatens everything the Verdun Council built their power on. The myth of our superior evolution, our natural right to govern this sector of space." Her hands framed his face. "Do you know what else your father found in those caves?" Dylan struggled to focus with her so close, her body heat seeping into him, the wine making everything feel more intense. "What?" "Genetic markers. Proof that modern Viridians are the result of ancient human-Viridian breeding." She leaned closer, her breath ghosting across his lips. "We're not just distant allies, Dylan. We're distant relatives." The revelation should have shocked him, but somehow, with Talala in his arms, it felt right natural, like a missing puzzle piece clicking into place. "The High Council would rather start a war than let this information become public," she continued. "They tried to destroy all the evidence, but my father, your father's friend and ally, managed to save some of it. It drove him mad, keeping these secrets, watching his best friend forced into exile." Now Dylan's hands had found their way to her hips, steadying her. "Now they know you're back, and they're worried you might have your father's research." Her fingers played with the hair at the nape of his neck. "But I think they're more worried about what we might discover together." "Is that why you brought me here? To help you expose the truth?" Tala's laugh was soft and intimate. "I brought you here because, for 15 years, I've dreamed of finishing what we started that last night before you left. The truth about our shared history." She pressed closer, her body molding to his. That's just a bonus." Dylan remembered that night, their first kiss interrupted by his father's frantic announcement that they had to leave immediately. "We were just kids then," he murmured. "We're not kids anymore," she breathed, her lips barely brushing his. "And I think it's time we made up for lost time, don't you? After all." Her smile turned wicked. "It's practically a family tradition." The wine, the revelations, the years of pent-up attraction, it all swirled together into an intoxicating mixture. But before Dylan could respond, a soft chime echoed through the apartment. "Proximity alert," Tala said, but didn't move from his lap. "We've got company." Vex, among others. She finally pulled back, but her eyes promised more to come. Mixed dap. Hope you're ready for some excitement, darling, because things are about to get very interesting. The proximity alert continued its soft chiming as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Taylor remained perched on Dylan's lap, but her playful demeanor had shifted to something more calculating. "Trust me," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "All right," Dylan replied without hesitation, his hands still resting on her hips. The door chimed, and Tala called out, "Enter! Security override! Ancestral dawn!" The door slid open to reveal Commander Vex, but his earlier menacing demeanor had vanished. He entered alone, carrying an ornate metallic box that pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the apartment's walls. "I see you've wasted no time getting reacquainted," Vex commented dryly, his eyes taking in their intimate position. Tella smiled deliberately, running a hand down Dylan's chest before finally sliding off his lap. "You're just jealous you didn't get to make the dramatic revelation yourself, old man. You always did have a flair for the theatrical, little one." Vex's stern expression softened into something almost paternal. "Though I must admit, your method of information sharing is rather unconventional." Dylan stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Tala, despite her amused snort. "So this was all a setup? The bar? The warnings?" "Not exactly." Vex placed the box on a nearby table. "Weak. We needed to be certain you were ready for the truth, that your feelings for each other were genuine enough to overcome the barriers between your people, like those barriers stopped our ancestors," Taylor quipped, pressing herself against Dylan's back, her fingers tracing patterns on his shoulders. "As I was just explaining to Dylan," Vex continued, "we're all one big happy family. Anyway, the Keepers of Dawn," Vex explained, activating the box, which projected a complex hologram of intertwining human and Viridian DNA strands. "We have protected this knowledge for millennia. We are the descendants of those who refuse to forget the truth of our shared heritage." "My father was one of you?" Dylan asked, watching the DNA strands dance and merge. "He discovered us by accident," Vex nodded. "Your mother, too. They became valuable allies, helping us preserve artifacts and research that the High Council would have destroyed when they were discovered." He trailed off meaningfully. "You helped them escape?" Dylan realized. "But why not tell me all this before?" Taylor's arm slipped around his waist. "Because you needed to choose this path yourself, darling, just like I did when Vex recruited me 5 years ago." Her lips brushed his shoulder blade, though I must admit, I had ulterior motives for accepting. "Oh?" Dylan turned in her embrace, raising an eyebrow. She hummed, green eyes sparkling. "I knew you'd come back eventually. Humans are wonderfully predictable that way, always returning to solve life's mysteries." Her fingers played with his beard. "And I wanted to be here when you did." "If you two could contain yourselves for a moment," Vex interrupted, though there was amusement in his voice. "We have more pressing matters to discuss." "Such as?" Dylan asked, not moving away from Tabalala. "Such as the fact that your father's research didn't stop when he reached Earth." Vex manipulated the hologram, revealing a star map. "He found more sites, more evidence, and now the High Council knows he passed that information to you before he died." Dylan tensed. "My father's alive?" Goat. "What?" Tala spoke in unison with him. "That message about my mother's death," Dylan continued. "That's how I knew something was wrong. She died when I was 19. My father disappeared 3 months ago, leaving me coordinates and a cryptic message about returning to where it began." Taylor's grip on him tightened. "The research facility, which is why we need to move quickly," Vex said. "The High Council's agents are already searching your ship, Dylan. They'll soon realize you've hidden your father's data elsewhere." "Bold of you to assume I brought it with me at all," Dylan grinned, turning to Tala. "Remember that game we used to play? Hiding treasures in the old mining tunnels?" Her eyes widened in delight. "The Crystal Cave? You brilliant man." She pulled him down for a quick, passionate kiss that left them both breathless. "I knew there was a reason I waited for you." Yes, you're both very clever and attractive," Vex sighed. "But those tunnels have been sealed for years. The only entrance is through the research facility itself." "Actually," Tanala's smile turned mischievous, "that's not entirely true. Remember those restricted areas I mentioned? Consulting on? She pressed a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a narrow passage. I may have done some unauthorized excavation of my own. Dylan laughed. God, I missed you. I know, she winked. Now shall we go find your father's research and change the course of human Viridian history? She held out her hand. Unless you'd rather stay here and continue where we left off. Don't tempt me, Dylan growled, taking her hand. Though I suppose saving civilization should come first. Should it, though? Tala teased, pulling him toward the passage. I mean, technically, making hybrid babies would also be preserving human-Viridian relations. The children! Vex called after them. Focus, please. And Tala, do try to keep your hands off him long enough to actually accomplish something. No promises, she called back, her laughter echoing in the tunnel. After all, I'm just following in our ancestors' footsteps. The ancient mining tunnels stretched beneath Port Emerald like a crystalline labyrinth, their walls embedded with the same bioluminescent minerals that decorated Tequila's apartment. The natural light cast dancing shadows as Dylan and Tanala navigated the narrow passages, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. These tunnels are amazing, Dylan whispered, his hand intertwined with Tabala's as she led the way. How did you find them? Let's just say my archaeological expertise involves more hands-on exploration than most, she replied with a sultry wink. Though I must admit, having you here makes the experience far more stimulating. Before Dylan could respond, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Tala pulled him into a narrow alcove, their bodies pressed together in the confined space. Her breath hitched as a muscular frame pinned her against the crystal wall. Well, she purred, fingers trailing down his bare chest. This feels familiar. Remember that game of hide-and-seek when we were teenagers? The one where your father nearly caught us? Dylan chuckled softly, his lips brushing her ear, though, as I recall, we weren't quite this close. Pity, Tala breathed, arching against him. We could have been practicing for this moment. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices. Split up. They have to be here somewhere. High Council agents, Tala whispered, though her hands didn't stop their exploration of Dylan's torso. We need to separate. There are two paths to the crystal cave. No, Dylan growled, tightening his hold on her. I just found you again. Quote, dot. You'll find me again, she promised, pulling him down for a passionate kiss that left them both dizzy. The eastern tunnel leads to the old ventilation shaft. The western path follows the water system. Meet me in our special place, the Crystal Grotto behind the waterfall. Dylan nodded, remembering their childhood sanctuary, where they carved their initials. Smart boy, Tala smiled, nipping at his lower lip. Now go, and don't keep a girl waiting too long. I have 15 years of fantasies to fulfill. With one last searing kiss, they separated. Dylan took the eastern tunnel while Tamala disappeared down the western path. The sound of pursuit split between them, exactly as planned. Dylan sprinted through the narrowing passage, his bare torso brushing against the crystal walls. The minerals responded to his touch, creating a trail of light that he hoped wouldn't give him away. His pursuers were getting closer, their boots thundering against the ancient stone. A blast of energy scorched the wall beside him. Stop! By order of the High Council. Yeah, that's not happening, Dylan muttered, ducking into a side tunnel. Passage twisted upward, becoming steeper until he was practically climbing. His muscles strained with the effort, sweat glistening on his skin in the crystal light. Meanwhile, Tequila was having her own adventure. The western tunnel had led her to the underground river system, forcing her to wade through knee-deep water. Her metallic outfit, designed for both fashion and function, adapted to the moisture, becoming more streamlined. You can't hide forever, half-breed lover, a voice called out behind her. The council knows what you and your father have been doing, darling. You have no idea what I've been doing, Tala called back, her voice echoing off the walls, though I'm about to do something far more interesting with that gorgeous human you're chasing. Quote, dot. She heard spluttering indignation behind her and grinned. Viridians and conservatives were so easy to fluster with the mere suggestion of interspecies relations, if they only knew their own history. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern, and Tala's heart leaped. The waterfall was just ahead, its crystalline cascade hiding the secret grotto where she and Dylan had spent countless hours as teenagers, where they shared their first innocent kiss the night before he left. Nothing about their reunion would be innocent, She slipped behind the waterfall just as her pursuers entered the cavern. The sound of rushing water masked her movements as she pressed her hand against a specific crystal formation. A hidden door slid open, revealing the grotto beyond. Dylan was already there, having arrived through the ventilation shaft. His skin glistened with exertion, water droplets from the waterfall spray clinging to his muscled frame. Their eyes met across the crystal-lit space. Years of longing and desire crystallizing into this single moment. "Took you long enough," he smiled, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. "A lady likes to make an entrance," Tala replied, meeting him halfway. Their bodies came together with magnetic intensity, the chase heightening every sensation. The crystal walls around them began to pulse with a deep rosy light, responding to their combined presence. The same way, Tapala realized with sudden clarity, they must have responded to their ancestors thousands of years ago. "The crystals," she gasped between kisses. "But they're reacting to our genetic compatibility." "This is why the High Council sealed these caves," Dylan growled, lifting her against one of the glowing walls. "They're living proof of our shared history." "I don't care about history right now," Tala murmured, her lips brushing his. "I care about making up for 15 years of lost time." Outside, they could hear their pursuers searching. But the waterfall's curtain and the secret door kept them safely hidden. The crystal grotto had become their sanctuary once again. But this time, they weren't innocent teenagers stealing quick kisses. They were 2 souls reconnecting across species and time, their passion echoing the ancient love stories written in their very DNA. The crystals pulsed brighter with each touch, each kiss, their light painting Talola's green skin with rainbow hues that mesmerized Dylan. "I never stopped thinking about you," Tala confessed, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Even when I joined the Keepers, even when I learned the truth about our peoples, it was always you." "I'm here now," Dylan promised, his voice rough with emotion, "and I'm not leaving again." The crystals around them reached a crescendo of light as they came together, their union witnessed only by the ancient stones that had seen countless such loves bloom in the depths of Verania's heart. Hours later, in the soft crystalline glow of their secret grotto, Tala lay contentedly in Dylan's arms, her green skin shimmering with an unusual iridescence. The waterfall's gentle cascade continued to mask their sanctuary. But something had changed. Something profound and ancient stirred within her. "Dylan," she whispered, tracing the contours of his chest. "Do you feel that?" The crystals were singing. Indeed, the cave walls emitted a subtle harmonic resonance, different from their earlier pulsing light. The sound was almost like a lullaby, reminiscent of ancient Viridian creation myths. "I've never seen them do this before," Dylan murmured, watching as the crystal's light seemed to dance across Tala's skin, concentrating around her midsection. "Are you all right?" Tala's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "More than all right," she breathed, placing her hand over her abdomen, where the light swirled most intensely. "Dylan, I think we just did something that hasn't happened naturally in thousands of years." Dylan propped himself up on an elbow, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. You mean our ancestors didn't just live together and love each other?" she explained, her voice trembling with excitement. "They created life together. And now?" She guided his hand to her stomach, where the crystal light seemed to respond to his touch, brightening significantly. "But I thought natural conception between humans and Viridians was impossible. That's why the High Council used genetic engineering to maintain the separation between our species," Tala finished. "They lied. They've been lying for generations. Natural conception was never impossible, just forbidden. The proof is in these very caves, in the ancient records they tried to destroy." Dylan pulled her closer, protective instinct surging through him. "They'll come after us now, not just for my father's research, but for this." His hand remained splayed across her abdomen, where new life had begun to form through their passionate union. "Let them try," Titila said fiercely, her green eyes flashing. Displied. "Our child will be living proof of what they've tried to hide. The humans and Viridians are meant to be together, that we're stronger united than divided." The crystal's song grew stronger, as if responding to her words. Dylan noticed that the patterns of light had begun to spread, creating intricate designs across the cave walls that hadn't been visible before. "Look," he pointed. "Those markings, they're like the cave paintings from your hologram, but more detailed." He squinted at the newly revealed images. They're showing the stages of human viridian pregnancy. Talala sat up, clutching Dylan's discarded shirt around her as she studied the illuminated walls. These must be medical records left by our ancestors to guide future generations. Her scientific mind kicked into high gear despite their intimate situation. The crystals aren't just pretty lights. They're data storage devices activated by compatible DNA patterns, which means, Dylan grinned, pulling her back into his embrace, that we literally made history today in more ways than one. Tala laughed, the sound echoing melodically off the crystal walls. Trust a human to make a joke at a moment like this. But her expression softened as she gazed at him, rather quaint. Though I suppose that's one of the many reasons I fell in love with you all those years ago. Just one of many, Dylan teased, nuzzling her neck. Care to share the others? Be fond. Before she could respond, a new sound cut through the waterfall's white noise. Voices approaching from both tunnels. They're regrouping, Tella whispered reluctantly, pulling away from Dylan's warmth. We need to move. The research can wait, Dylan said firmly, helping her to her feet. You and our child are more important. No, Tella shook her head, her tactical mind already working. We need that research now more than ever. It might contain vital information about human viridian pregnancies. She pressed her hand to the crystal wall, which responded by revealing a hidden passage. Besides, I have a feeling your father knew more about this possibility than he let on. Dylan quickly gathered their scattered clothing. His protective instincts now extended to include their miraculous new creation. You think he found evidence of other natural conceptions? I think, Tala said, pulling him into the secret tunnel just as their pursuers' lights became visible through the waterfall. That your father suspected this might happen. Why else would he lead us back to these specific caves? Quote, the passage sealed behind them just as voices erupted in their former sanctuary. In the close confines of the new tunnel, Dylan pulled Tala close, his hand instinctively finding her abdomen again. When we find him, he promised, I'm going to have some choice words about his roundabout matchmaking methods. Talala's laugh was quiet, but joyous. Oh, darling, I think he knew we didn't need much help in that department after all, she winked. I recognized you instantly, didn't I? The hidden passage twisted deeper into Verdun's crystalline heart, its walls still humming with that strange ancient resonance. Dylan and Tadila moved swiftly through the narrow tunnel, their bodies occasionally brushing in ways that sent sparks of electricity through them. You know, Tala whispered, her breath hot against Dylan's ear as they paused at an intersection. Being hunted shouldn't feel this exciting. Quote, Dylan pulled her closer, ostensibly to check around the corner, but his touch lingered. Blame it on the pregnancy hormones, he teased, his fingers tracing patterns on her hip. Oh, so now you're an expert on human viridian biology? She turned in his arms, pressing him against the crystal wall. The stones immediately began to pulse with that now familiar rosy light. I'd say I'm getting some hands-on experience. Quote, Dylan's flirtatious reply was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. Before they could retreat, light flooded the tunnel, but instead of the expected hostile forces, they found themselves facing a group of younger Viridian officers, led by a familiar face. Captain Marana! Tala gasped, recognizing one of her former archaeology students. The young Viridian woman's green skin flushed darker as she took in their intimate position in the telling glow of the crystals around them. Her squad shifted uncomfortably behind her. Professor Tala, Marana acknowledged, then glanced at Dylan. And this must be the human who's causing all the commotion upstairs. Her eyes lingered on where the crystal light swirled around Talala's midsection. Though I see the rumors are true. Quote, If you're here to arrest us, Dylan started, moving to shield Tala. We're here to help, Marana interrupted, holstering her weapon. Many of us have known the truth for years, about our ancestors, about what's possible between our species. She gestured to her squad. We're all products of the Academy's Advanced Genetics program. Quote, They told us we were engineered to be compatible with humans, but you suspected that compatibility already existed naturally, Talala finished, her scientific mind racing. That's why you were so interested in my research on ancient breeding patterns. Marana nodded. The High Council's been lying to both our peoples there. They've been using genetic engineering not to create compatibility, but to suppress it. to prevent exactly what's happened between you two. Quote, dot. The crystal song grew stronger, as if confirming her words. Dylan felt Tala lean back against him, her hand finding his and guiding it to her abdomen, where their miracle grew. The commander of the security forces is coming personally, Marana continued urgently. But half his troops are like us, descendants of the original hybrid bloodlines. Even if we didn't know it until now, when they see proof that natural conception is possible, they'll switch sides. Way, Dylan realized. The High Council's control is based on keeping our people separate. Exactly, Marana smiled. But we need to move quickly. The Loyalists are. A blast of energy struck the wall above them, showering everyone with crystal shards. At the other end of the tunnel stood Commander Vex, looking both worried and amused. While I appreciate the dramatic timing, he called out, deflecting another shot with some kind of energy shield. Perhaps we could continue this revelation somewhere less exposed this way. Tella pulled Dylan toward a section of wall that had begun to glow in response to their combined presence. A doorway materialized, leading to what appeared to be an ancient medical chamber. The group rushed inside, just as more security forces rounded the corner. Marana's squad took up defensive positions, while Vex sealed the entrance. Well, he said, turning to face them. This is either going to be a magnificent victory for truth and unity, or we're about to start a civil war. Quote, dot. Why not both? Tella quipped, though she kept Dylan's arms firmly around her. The crystal light had spread throughout the chamber, revealing more ancient medical data about human viridian reproduction. How are you feeling? Dylan murmured against her neck, his concern evident despite their dire situation. Wonderful, actually. Tala turned in his embrace, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Though I think we should probably practice making babies a few more times, for science. Quote, dot. Professor, Marana protested, though she was fighting a smile. What? Tala shrugged innocently. The ancient texts clearly show multiple attempts increase success rates. I'm simply suggesting thorough research methodology. Quote. Is she always like this? Vex asked Dylan. God, I hope so. Dylan grinned, pulling Tala closer. The crystals around them brightened in response, displaying what appeared to be successful human viridian births throughout history. Focus, lovebirds, Marana called from her position by the door. The commander's forces are gathering. We need a plan. Quote, dot. Actually, Dalila said, studying the ancient displays with renewed interest. I think these chambers might give us exactly what we need. She pointed to a section of the wall where the crystals showed a massive gathering. Our ancestors used these caves for public ceremonies, a declaration of unity between our peoples. And? Vex prompted. She smiled wickedly. What better way to announce our pregnancy than with an ancient broadcast system designed specifically for revealing human viridian unions? Dylan laughed, his hands spanning possessively across her abdomen. Using our ancestors' own technology to expose their lies? That's my girl. Your girl. Tala raised an eyebrow, though she pressed closer to him. Pretty presumptuous for someone who only just remembered me this morning. Oh, I remembered. Dylan growled playfully. I just didn't recognize the sexy goddess you'd become. Though I'm certainly making up for lost time now. If you two could postpone the foreplay, Vex interrupted dryly, we have a revolution to start. The ancient broadcast chamber hummed with energy as Talala's fingers danced across the crystalline control panel. Dylan stood behind her, his presence both protective and distracting as his hands rested on her hips. Are you sure about this? He murmured, nuzzling her neck. Once we activate this system? Having second thoughts about starting a revolution? Talala teased, leaning back against his muscular chest. The crystal lights pulsed in harmony with their proximity, responding to their combined DNA. Never. Dylan grinned, his beard tickling her sensitive skin. Just thinking about how my childhood neighbor turned out to be quite the revolutionary. Quote, dot. Oh, please, she laughed, turning to face him. You were the one who always got us into trouble. Remember the time we borrowed your father's research shuttle? Before Dylan could respond, the chamber's crystals began to resonate at a higher frequency. Marana rushed in from her guard position at the entrance. Multiple security forces converging, she reported. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Tala nodded, pressing her palm against the main crystal array. Dylan covered her hand with his, and the entire chamber erupted in brilliant light. The ancient technology recognized their combined genetic signature activating dormant protocols that had waited millennia for this moment. "Broadcasting now," Tala announced as the crystal walls projected their image throughout Port Emerald. "Citizens of Verania, humans of the colony, what you're about to see is the truth that's been hidden from all of us." The chamber filled with holographic displays of ancient human Viridian couples, their children, their communities. But something unexpected happened as the broadcast reached the city above. The same crystalline resonance that had revealed Tala's pregnancy began affecting the population. "Fascinating," Vex muttered, watching through the security feeds as people throughout the city began to glow with various intensities of bioluminescence. "The broadcast isn't just showing the truth," Tala realized, her scientific excitement evident despite the chaos. "It's awakening dormant hybrid genes in the population. The High Council's genetic suppression is breaking down," Dylan realized, pulling her closer as reports flooded in throughout Port Emerald. "Verbidians," he whispered, watching the transformation through the feeds. "Thousands of years of artificial separation undone in moments." "Like us," Dylan murmured, his hand playing possessively across her abdomen where their child grew. "Though I think we did it the fun way." "Speaking of fun," Tala purred, turning in his embrace, "these crystals seem very responsive to certain activities." Professor Morana groaned from her position by the door. "Maybe save the baby making for after the revolution?" "Actually," Vex interjected, studying the ancient texts that continued to reveal themselves, "the crystal's response to your enthusiasm appears to be strengthening the broadcast. The more intense your connection, the more the suppressed genes are awakening in the population." "Well then," Tala grinned wickedly at Dylan, "I suppose we have a duty to the revolution." "I love how your mind works," Dylan laughed, pulling her into a passionate kiss that sent waves of crystal light pulsing through the chamber and out into the city. Hours later, Port Emerald had transformed. The High Council's forces had largely stood down, many of them discovering their own hybrid heritage. The streets filled with celebrating citizens, their skin glowing with various shades of bioluminescence as ancient genes reawakened. The crystal chamber now served as a temporary headquarters for the transitional government. Tala sat in Dylan's lap as they reviewed reports. "The High Council has officially dissolved," Morana announced, entering with a broad smile. "And the first natural human Viridian wedding ceremonies are being scheduled. Apparently, we're starting a trend." "Hear that?" Tala turned to Dylan, her green eyes sparkling. "We're trendsetters." "Pretty sure we're more than that," he replied, his hand caressing her slightly rounded abdomen where their child continued to grow. "We're living proof that love finds a way, even across species and time." "Speaking of time," she purred, "we have some to make up for 15 years' worth by my count." "If you two are going to start again," Vex called out, not looking up from his reports, "please do it somewhere else. These crystals are sensitive enough without your particular brand of enthusiasm." Laughing, Dylan stood, sweeping Tala into his arms. "What do you say, beautiful? Ready to start our own revolution?" Tala wrapped her arms around his neck, her green skin glowing with happiness and desire. "Always. Though this time, you better recognize me right away." "Trust me," Dylan promised, carrying her toward their private quarters. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again." As they left, the crystals pulsed with ancient power, celebrating another union between their peoples. In the streets above, humans and Viridians continued to discover their shared heritage, their bodies glowing with the same light that had first revealed Tala's pregnancy. The revolution hadn't just changed their society, it had awakened something ancient and beautiful. A reminder that love knows no boundaries, not even those of different species. And, in the heart of Port Emerald, a human man and his Viridian lover had proven that sometimes all it takes is recognizing each other to change the world.